The identity of the Awanichi people is inseparable from the geography of their homeland. They called the valley Ahwahnee, a word from their Southern Sierra Miwok language that likely means gaping mouth-like place, a vivid description of the valley's dramatic open appearance. Consequently, they called themselves the Ahwahnechee, the people of Ahwahnee. This self-identification underscores a profound connection where the people and the place are extensions of one another. Archaeological evidence suggests this relationship is ancient, with human habitation in the region dating back as far as 8,000 years. The Awanichi themselves were a band composed of Southern Sierra Miwok and Mono peoples, reflecting a history of migration and intermingling with neighboring groups. They maintained active trade routes, exchanging acorns and other local goods with the Mono Lake Paiute people to the east for resources like salt and obsidian. In stark contrast to their own descriptive and intimate name for their home, the name Yosemite was imposed upon them and their land through colonial misunderstanding and violence. The term originated with neighboring Miwok bands, who after a period of conflict referred to the Awanichi as Yohehemiti, meaning they are killers. During the 1851 invasion, members of the Mariposa Battalion overheard this term and, mistakenly believing it meant grizzly bear, adopted it as the name for the people they were displacing and, ultimately, for the valley itself. The official naming of the park thus codified a hostile, external label, erasing the people's own name for their home and supplanting it with a monument to their subjugation. This act of linguistic displacement was part of a broader process of rendering the indigenous landscape invisible. Before colonial renaming, every major feature of the valley had an Awanichi name, tying the physical world to their oral histories and spiritual beliefs. These names reveal landscape that was not a blank slate, but a storied and sacred geography. Ahwahnechee society was not a simple nomadic band, but a complex polity with well-defined structures of governance, kinship, and spiritual practice. Their political world was organized into independent sovereign communities, often called tribelets, each controlling a specific territory. The Ahwahnechee of Yosemite Valley constituted such a community, with their principal village, also called Ahwahnee, serving as the political and ceremonial center. Leadership was hereditary, typically passing from a chief to a son. However, in the absence of a male heir, a daughter could inherit the position, or the community could select a new leader based on their character and wisdom. The chief was not an absolute ruler, but an advisor and manager who guided the community, organized ceremonies, mediated disputes, and acted as a representative in relations with other tribes. The most fundamental organizing principle of Ahwahnechee life was the moiety system, a dualistic framework that ordered the entire cosmos. Every person, animal, plant, and spiritual force belonged to one of two halves, Tunaka, land, or Kikwa, water. This division was reflected in the physical layout of the valley itself. Villages on the north side of the Merced River, Wakomata, were associated with the land moiety and its totem, the grizzly bear, U'umate, while villages on the south side belonged to the water moiety, linked to the coyote. This worldview provided a cognitive map for social and ecological balance. Kinship was traced bilaterally, through both mother and father, but the moiety, inherited from the father, guided social obligations. Marriage was preferably exogamous between members of opposite moieties, and the system dictated specific reciprocal duties during important ceremonies, most notably funerals, where members of one moiety would care for the deceased of the other. Daily life unfolded within extended family units living in conical homes called urchum or omacha. These dwellings were framed with poles and covered with thick, waterproof layers of cedar bark, with a central fire pit and an opening at the top for smoke. The spiritual worldview of the Awanichi was animistic. They understood the universe as a living entity in which all things, rocks, rivers, animals, and people, were related and possessed a spirit. Creation stories provided a moral and cosmological foundation, and spiritual power was sought through visions and dreams. Shamans and medicine people served as conduits to the supernatural world, leading ceremonies and healing the sick. The sweat lodge was a vital institution, used by men for ritual purification, particularly before a hunt, to cleanse themselves of human scent and pray for success. This intricate social and spiritual system fostered a deep sense of place and a reciprocal relationship with the world they saw not as a collection of resources, but a community of living relatives. The Awanichi economy was a sophisticated hunter-gatherer system perfectly attuned to the seasonal cycles of the Sierra Nevada. While their diet was diverse, the undisputed staff of life was the acorn, particularly from the California black oak, Quercus kilogi, which constituted as much as 60% of their caloric intake. The reliability and storability of the acorn harvest allowed for a semi-sedentary existence, with permanent villages in the valley. The process of turning the bitter, tannic-rich acorn into a nutritious food source was laborious and complex, a testament to generations of accumulated knowledge. The cycle began in the autumn with a communal harvest. The gathered acorns were dried and stored in large, meticulously constructed granaries called chuk-ah. These basket-like structures were raised off the ground on poles, lined with wormwood to repel insects, and thatched to shed rain and snow, allowing acorns to be stored for several years as a buffer against poor harvests. When needed, the acorns were cracked open and the nut meats were pounded into a fine flour using stone pestles on bedrock mortars, countless examples of which can still be found throughout the valley. The most critical step was leaching, where the bitter and indigestible tannic acid was removed. Women would carefully prepare a shallow basin in clean sand, place the flour within it, and pour warm water over it repeatedly for several hours until the bitterness was gone.
From this purified flour, they created two primary dishes. One was a thick porridge or mush called nupa, cooked by dropping red-hot stones into a watertight basket filled with the flour and water mixture. The other was a type of bread or loaf called ule, baked on hot, flat rocks. While acorns formed the base of their diet, the Ahwahnechee sustained themselves with a wide variety of other foods according to the season. They hunted deer, bear, and smaller game, and fished the Merced River for trout. They gathered manzanita berries, pine nuts, and a host of edible roots and plants. This diversified subsistence strategy was supplemented by an active trade network. The Ahwahnechee traveled to the east side of the Sierra to trade acorns with the Mono Lake Paiute for obsidian, for tools and projectile points, salt, and pine nuts. From the west, they obtained clamshells for beads and other decorative items from coastal groups. This system of subsistence and exchange ensured their prosperity and resilience within their mountain homeland. The picturesque landscape of Yosemite Valley that captivated early American visitors, with its open meadows, scattered groves of majestic oaks, and abundant wildlife, was not an accident of nature. It was the product of a deliberate and sophisticated system of land management practiced by the Ahwahnechee for thousands of years. The concept of Yosemite as an uninhabited wilderness is a colonial fiction that erases this long history of active stewardship. This erasure was not merely a passive oversight, but an essential ideological act that justified the dispossession of the valley's inhabitants. By framing the land as untouched and pristine, settlers and early conservationists could ignore the legitimate sovereignty of the Ahwahnechee and claim the valley for their own purposes, whether for resource extraction or for aesthetic preservation. The primary tool of Ahwahnechee ecological management was fire. They conducted frequent low-intensity cultural burns, intentionally setting fires to clear the forest understory. This practice had numerous, carefully calculated benefits. It prevented the encroachment of conifers like pine and cedar, ensuring that the sun-loving black oaks, the source of their staple food, could thrive. The burning also promoted the growth of grasses and other plants that provided forage for deer and other game animals, effectively enhancing their hunting grounds. Furthermore, these regular, controlled burns consumed dead wood and brush, preventing the buildup of fuel that could lead to the kind of catastrophic, high-intensity wildfires that now threaten the park. The open, park-like character of the valley floor was a human-created and maintained ecosystem. The suppression of cultural burning after the Ahwahnechee were removed had immediate and dramatic ecological consequences. Without fire, dense thickets of young conifers began to choke the meadows and crowd out the ancient oak groves, fundamentally altering the character of the landscape. The very wilderness that the national park was created to preserve was an artifact of the indigenous culture it had expelled. The world of the Ahwahnechee began to unravel long before the arrival of the Mariposa Battalion. Around the year 1000, a devastating epidemic, likely a European disease like smallpox or measles to which they had no immunity, swept through the valley. The virgin soil epidemic was so severe that the survivors abandoned their homeland, believing it to be cursed, and scattered among neighboring Miwok and Mono communities. It was only a generation later that a leader of mixed Ahwahnechee and Mono Paiute descent, Tenaya, gathered the remnants of the tribe and led them back to their ancestral valley. The final cataclysm arrived with the California Gold Rush in 1848. The influx of hundreds of thousands of miners into the Sierra foothills was an unprecedented disaster for all native peoples of the region. This invasion was not a peaceful settlement, but a violent conquest, a localized expression of what is now recognized as the California Genocide. Between 1846 and 1873, the indigenous population of California plummeted from approximately 150,000 to 30,000. Thousands were murdered in state-sanctioned massacres, and tens of thousands more died from starvation, forced labor, and disease. California's first governor, Peter Burnett, openly called for a war of extermination, and the state legislature authorized over $1 million to fund volunteer militias for the purpose of killing native people. The miners destroyed the ecosystems on which the tribes depended, and their encroachment onto Ahwahnechee lands led to escalating conflict. In late 1850, after attacks by miners, the Ahwahnechee warriors retaliated by raiding several trading posts, including one on the Fresno River owned by a white trader named James Savage. This act would provide the pretext for a full-scale military invasion of their homeland. In response to the raids, a state-sanctioned volunteer militia, the Mariposa Battalion, was formed in early 1851 with James Savage as its major. Its official mission was to suppress the Indian uprising and forcibly remove all native people from the Sierra foothills to a reservation on the plains. On March 27, 1851, while pursuing the Ahwahnechee, a contingent of the battalion became the first non-indigenous man to enter Yosemite Valley. Their discovery was not an act of exploration, but an invasion. The events of this campaign are known primarily through the first-hand, though deeply biased accounts of battalion members, most notably Dr. Lafayette Bunnell and Robert Eccleston. Their diaries and memoirs are invaluable historical documents, but they must be read critically. They reveal a profound colonial cognitive dissonance, the ability to marvel at the sublime beauty of the landscape while simultaneously carrying out the brutal work of dispossessing its people. Bunnell, who is credited with naming many of the valley's features, wrote with awe that he witnessed, but his narrative also recounts with military detachment the burning of the Ahwahnechee main village and the deliberate destruction of their vast stores of acorns and other foods, a calculated tactic to induce starvation and force their surrender. These texts are a window into a mindset that could fundamentally separate a land from its people, valuing the former as a monument of nature while viewing the latter as an impediment to be removed. At the center of this conflict was the Ahwahnechee leader, Chief Tenea, an elderly man by 1851. He had been born and raised among the Mono Paiutes after his Ahwahnechee father fled the earlier epidemic, and he had earned his leadership by gathering the scattered survivors and re-establishing their presence in the valley. He was faced with an impossible choice: fight a technologically superior and ruthless enemy, or surrender and lead his people into exile. Tenea initially attempted a strategy of diplomacy and evasion, meeting with Major Savage while trying to conceal the true location and number of his people. When the battalion advanced into the valley, most of the Ahwahnechee fled, but Tenea and a small group were captured. A second expedition, led by Captain John Bowling in May 1851, proved even more tragic. During a skirmish, several of Tenea's sons were captured. As one of them tried to escape, he was shot and killed by a militiaman. Bunnell recorded Tenea's profound grief and defiant words to his captors, a moment that encapsulates the personal toll of the invasion. Ultimately, Tenea and the remainder of his band were captured and forcibly marched to the Fresno River Reservation. They languished in the unfamiliar flatlands, and Tenea repeatedly begged to be allowed to return to his mountain home. Eventually, his request was granted. However, peace was short-lived. In 1852, after several miners were killed in the valley, troops were dispatched again, and 5 Ahwahnechee men were executed. Tenea and his remaining followers fled over the Sierra to seek refuge with the Mono Paiutes. The following year, a dispute over stolen horses erupted between the Ahwahnechee and their hosts. In the ensuing conflict, Chief Tenea was stoned to death. His death marked the effective end of the Ahwahnechee as an independent political entity, their people killed or absorbed into neighboring tribes. Despite the war and the death of their chief, some Ahwahnechee and other Miwok and Paiute people gradually returned to Yosemite Valley. They survived on the margins of a rapidly changing world, their homeland now a destination for tourists and settlers. With the establishment of the Yosemite Grant in 1864 and Yosemite National Park in 1890, their role was formalized as one of subservience within a burgeoning tourist economy. Men found work as laborers, guides, and woodcutters, while women became laundresses and housekeepers for the new hotels. A significant source of income for women was the sale of their intricately woven baskets, which became prized souvenirs for visitors. This economic integration, however, came at the cost of their dignity and cultural autonomy. The park administration, catering to tourist fantasies of the Wild West, organized annual Indian Field Days. These events forced native residents to perform a distorted version of their identity, dressing in Plains Indian regalia and competing in horse races and parades for the entertainment of white visitors. Their survival became dependent on the commodification of a caricature of their own culture.